sense. So
It's
Tara, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for taking a minute out. And before we get into the jubilance of jazz musicians releasing albums and releasing music and playing live music after all of this time that we've been away, how did you survive COVID, the 3 year time period, and how has it subsequently changed the way you do things now?
Well, I was one of those musicians that was fortunate to be able to record an album during COVID. And so that was a saving grace because that really gave me an opportunity to reconnect with who I am as a musician. And then also I have an online presence as like a social media commentator. And that was a real outlet for me as well. And so I just put myself into that work and just kind of found a new way of expressing myself where I didn't have to interface with people necessarily. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, being away, I just am getting back to performing. My first performance was just a few days ago in Nashville. And so I don't know, it's like riding a bike. You just sort of you get back into it and you're more grateful, I guess, after being away for a time. And so, I it was surprising to me how natural it felt to get right back to it.
So how does the audience feel prior to, like, now versus prior to the pandemic?
Well, as I said, I just have had the one performance really. I did have a couple of performances, a few performances last year. And I think we're all just more grateful. I think with any performance that I've had last year or this year, I think I've just felt that just that extra bit of warmth and enthusiasm and excitement at just, wow, we get to do this. There's just a gratefulness, I think, on all our parts to be back at it again.
So what does it mean to have material come out now? Does it feel more triumphant? Like, I'm back, this is it, let's go.
Yeah, well, like I said, I released an album in 2021. And so I don't feel like I've necessarily been completely out during the pandemic. I am really grateful now to be coming back with even more original music. That's where the celebration is kind of happening for me, because I feel like I'm a songwriter fundamentally, and I sing as a way of delivering those songs to people. And so I'm really, really grateful that I did not have to sit out for, 3 years or more. But to come back now with music that I can actually present to people, because that last album, we really didn't get to tour with it or anything. So yeah, just gratefulness all around, gratefulness to be getting my music out there, gratefulness to be before audiences that are just, even more appreciative than they were previously.
So this is your sixth album. What are you hoping the listener gets from this project?
Well, I hope they get a bit of my heart and my soul, which is what I try to put into my music, particularly with the songs that I write. And I very carefully choose the cover songs that I do as well. But I hope that they come away, first of all, knowing me more deeply as an artist and as a human being, and just kind of locking into, the who of who I am, and then finding their own place to healing. The album is, if it has a loose theme, it's probably healing and recovery. And I think a lot of us are in that space right now, post pandemic, of healing and recovering from a lot of things. I was just talking to my husband earlier today and saying, hey, even with whether we wear a mask or whether we don't wear a mask, and a lot of that is, at this point, is maybe more psychological, and just, we're all kind of recovering from the trauma of what we've been through, and we need
Yeah.
to acknowledge that we are in a place of, having been really washed ashore. So just kind of taking time to sit with our feelings and evaluate where we are, and that's the kind of album that it is. It's an album that's focused on personal healing.
Let's go back to the beginning of this journey. Where were you born and raised, and how did this jazz seed get planted in you to become who you are?
Well, I was born and mostly raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And my parents were ministers. My father was a music minister, and he was also a preacher. My mother was a singer. And I had six brothers and sisters, and we kind of all came up in church and singing in church, kind of like the Von Trapp children, and singing harmony and things. So that was my kind of first acclimation to music. So my earliest, memories of music are really of gospel, like the classic families of gospel, the Winans, the Clark sisters, the Hawkins, families like that. And we moved around a lot when I was a kid. Moved to Spokane, Washington, Detroit, Michigan. I spent time in Baltimore, and Arkansas, California, all kinds of places. And so I feel like I've gathered influences from, every region I've lived in, and just we've grown up, being acculturated, I guess, by so many different groups of people. So I don't feel necessarily grounded or locked into any one thing, which can be a good thing, can be a very positive thing. But I would just sneak away. I mean, we had kind of a ban on secular music as a child because it was a very conservative religious home. And so I would just sneak away and, listen to my little light rock hits, and I would listen to classics, Ella Fitzgerald and big band music and Mel Torme and whatever I could get, Take Six, whatever I could get my hands on. And I would put my radio under the bed and, listen to Manhattan Transfer and James Taylor and just, all kinds of groups that would probably be considered tame by today's standards. But it was very much a, forbidden thing in my childhood. But I just, I would go down to the end of the dial and just see what I could find, these little kind of, off-brand, like college radio stations, whoever was playing something I had not heard before. And my ear kind of tuned in to a lot of standards and, balladry and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lost art because we don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, you can if you want, but at the end of the day, we have everything at our fingertips with the internet, so we can go wherever we want.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's like it is a lost art of just having to really fight for, the discovery of like what you connect with. And it's just all kind of, I would imagine it's kind of given to kids these days. They just, they don't necessarily have to battle for it. It's just you've got all of this crap coming at you. And you just have to decide kind of what your maybe aesthetic is. But for us, it was like, man, you had to dig. I mean, we were, digging in crates and just, we really had to work for it.
Yeah,
Which
absolutely.
I think it strengthens your muscle, our artistic muscles, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, yeah. When you did finally get out and you had the chance to see your first live show, what was your first live jazz show that blew you away?
I don't know. I mean, I was way an adult by that point. I was out of college by that point. I had moved back to Detroit, Michigan. I think it was either Tony Bennett or Harry Connick Jr. or somebody like that, because those are the folks I really started plugging into early on, just kind of more the standards, singers, standards and swing, that kind of thing. So yeah, it had to have been either Tony Bennett or Harry Connick Jr.
So, of all of these places that you lived in as an artist, what was the one that really tugged on your heartstrings the most? The word you felt more comfortable, or you got really good influences, or felt something?
Oh, Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, that's where I moved from after 13 years. So I have spent the bulk of my artistic life in Nashville. And so it doesn't, seems like kind of an unlikely place to establish yourself as a jazz singer, jazz artist. But there is a scene in Nashville, and we just finished playing there, an album release show there, and just had such a warm reception from, the audience, that they've watched us build our career there. And so, yeah, just there are an incredible amount of just talented musicians who can do everything, because
Yeah,
you can't just be one thing in Nashville.
right.
You really have to have that broad skill set. And so there were musicians, pianists that showed up at that gig that had played previous gigs with me, because we brought down a guy named Mike King, who's an incredibly talented pianist from New York. But the guys who played with us in Nashville, they came to the gig, and we had them come up and sit in, and it was just a warm reception that we received. But I mean, I what do they say? I cut my teeth, musical teeth, in Nashville, and I can't really imagine having had to do that in New York or LA, even though I thought I was ready back then, 13 years ago, to do that in New York or LA. But I mean, those cities are just such butt kickers. I had a lot of foundational stuff that I needed to get in place before I moved away, which we ended up moving to New York a couple of years ago, and now we're in Philly. But I'm glad I had the opportunity to cut my musical teeth in an environment that was supportive and that was welcoming, and the people were kind. And I made a lot of mistakes and had a lot to learn, but it was good to revisit and just in the fullness of who I am now. That was really cool.
What was the first stage that you got on where you were like, man, I can't believe I'm performing here? You really felt like it was almost surreal.
Probably, I would say a few years ago, I had the opportunity to open for Gregory Porter at TPAC, the Tennessee Performing Arts Center. That was probably one of the first kind of larger gigs that I've done where I just felt like, it was almost a surreal kind of feeling because he's one of my favorite artists, period. And to perform at TPAC, yeah, that was pretty cool.
So speaking of Porter and other people that you've been around, what do you learn from the legends and luminaries that you in turn teach younger musicians and players that you get around?
I was having a conversation a couple of days ago with a friend of mine, actually one of those pianists from Nashville that showed up and thankfully came out to our performance there. And he was kind of asking, like, how do you prevent yourself from becoming intimidated by being around people who are just super talented and all this stuff? And I'm like, I know that I'm not the best singer in the world. I'm not a vocal technician. I do what I do, I guess fairly well, or I wouldn't be doing it. I do understand that, but what I really lock into, honestly, is establishing a sense of artistic integrity and uniqueness. I think for anyone that does what I do, you really have to invest and believe in that sense of uniqueness. What is it that I bring to the table that no one else brings? Because you are going to be looking left and right, and every time some new person pops up, it's going to be this squirrel moment where you're distracted and you're wondering why you aren't achieving or accomplishing things at the level that this person is. And I'm like, when I think about the people that I really hold in high regard, and I'll mention some of the contemporaries, people like Emily King and India Arie or Samara Joy, who's just burning up the scene right now. And, people who are just, to me, artistically just so integral. That's what I lock into. I'm not really necessarily worried about whether this person is the best singer that I've ever heard in my entire life. I'm not necessarily worried about whether their presentation or their style or their looks or their whatever is this the most amazing thing out there. What I'm concerned about is the songwriting something that I can lock into, and does their vocal delivery match that songwriting, and do I feel their heart? Do I feel who they are, and is there a sense of consistency, artistic consistency throughout their projects? And so I'm very picky, very particular about who I lock into, and it has to really resonate with me on a heart level, and that's what I hope to accomplish with the music that I put out there. So it's just a super important lesson for me to learn, because that stuff can mess with you. Am I good enough? Do I measure up? And should I be doing this or that? You got to know who you are, and so that the people I lock into and love, that's what they bring to the table.
So on this journey as a musician, what do you like the best about it? What is the thing that ultimately motivates? I mean, you got recording, you got live shows, you got all of these different aspects that go into it, but what do you look forward to the most?
Honestly, there's nothing like just those quiet moments that I have with myself, where I get to discover a new song that is coming through me. And it doesn't happen as much as it used to. It doesn't happen often enough. And it's something that I really have to fight for now. But the songwriting process is my favorite thing of all. I mean, even over performing, even over being in the studio, I do love performing, but that comes with, there's demands that are being placed on you, and you have to be on. I don't necessarily have a problem with being on when I get to the stage, but I'm always kind of concerned, like, is my voice going to hold up? Is this, is it going to be at the level that I want it to be? And it's performance. But the songwriting process, it's very solitary, and I get to surprise myself, and I get to rediscover that feeling of creativity, which doesn't happen nearly often enough.
Let's say we have a time machine. We get off the phone, pulls up in front of your house. You can go anywhere in the history of jazz and see anybody. Where are you going? Who are you going to see?
Oh, that's a good question. Who am I going to see? I don't know. I would probably go somewhere, I don't know where, back to the mid 60s, and I would see Nina Simone. I'd probably go watch Nina do what she does. Probably late 60s. I'd say about 1967 Nina.
Nice.
Yeah.
So let's go back to those days of you trying the radio dial to get that station and to hear more jazz. What is it about it? Why do you love jazz?
Oh, I think probably it jibed with something in how I was raised. As I said, I was raised in a very conservative Christian home. We listened to a lot of really kind of corny, like old-timey gospel music and Christian music. And I think lyrically, the classic songwriters are those are my favorite songwriters of all time. Harold Arlen and Cole Porter and George Gershwin and Irving Berlin and folks like that. I think just because my parents, my father specifically, was so deeply focused on lyrical content, which is a lot of why we were not able to listen to secular music growing up. It was like, what's going in your spirit? What are you absorbing? And everything that you listen to has meaning. And we don't want you having any sort of influences that are vain in any way, or that are going to take you in a way that you shouldn't go. And so when I started listening to the lyrics of those old songs, I locked into that. I mean, it's just we have not had an era like that. I mean, the singer-songwriter era of the 60s and 70s and partly the 80s was a great era for lyric writing, and the folk movement and all of that. But the Tin Pan Alley era and just the Great American Songbook era, just lyrically, and then of course musically as well. There's just never been anything like it since then, and having grown up in a musical family with a musician as a father, and then me kind of entering my own world as a musician, it's just you're not really going to reach a higher level of musical expression or lyric writing than the Great American Songbook era. You're just it can't happen again.
Yeah. So everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Wow, these are some deep
This is the
questions.
therapy part. This is the therapy part.
Now, is this artistically or as a human being?
Well, I think it's like the circles of like who you are, and they all kind of come together. What's that part that's shaded?
Oh, the confluence of it all.
Yeah.
I'm a storyteller. I think ultimately, like I said, I have developed this whole other career as an online commentator around race and social and cultural issues, politics and all sorts of things on TikTok and on Instagram and across social media platforms. And so what I do over there really does connect, as you said, in this, Venn diagram sort of way. It connects with what I do musically. And so ultimately those are, I do explainers, like, informational videos in that context. And what I'm doing as a songwriter and as a singer is that I'm telling stories.
Yeah.
And so, ultimately I'm a communicator and I'm a storyteller, essentially.
Great answer. Hey, if anyone wants to pick up the brand new album, live shows, anything pertaining to your world, where is the best place to go?
Well, my albums are now available if they want physical product, they're available on Amazon and Target and Walmart. If they want to listen to it online, it's available to stream and download on places like Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, any place where you get digital music, they are available.
Wonderful. This has been great. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for your time today. Best of luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to have been on your show.
Well, thank you.